Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you are on the planet, and welcome to all the trade day team to the Wednesday, 11th of June, Bull versus Bear webinar. Steve Miley here on the call for trade day. Welcome, everyone. We're going to be a fairly brief webinar. There's not a huge amount to go through in here. A couple of significant points, but not a huge amount. So I'll just make those and then we'll wind up fairly quick today. The key focus today is going to be on the CPI data, which we have now in just under 1 hour. Core CPI and headline CPI data month on month, year on year. So it's certainly going to be keeping an eye on that, whether it gives any kind of impetus for the Fed to maybe bring forward cuts or potentially not do rate cuts. An eye on that. We don't expect any rate cuts. Remember the meeting next week. Not expect any rate cuts next week from the Fed, but I'm just keeping an eye on that for potential future rate cut optimism or pessimism. So that's going to be kind of key to watch. It's a key piece of data this week. We're looking at that. That comes in just under the hour. The other thing to note is the 10-year note auction. So we have that. More importantly, probably tomorrow is the 30-year auction, but the 10-year auction also important. That's at 1 o'clock Eastern time today. So 1 o'clock Eastern, keeping an eye on that. That could have a knock-on effect, even if you're not trading the bond markets, the fixed income markets. Where will have a definite impact onto. It could easily have an impact onto the into the indices as well. So keeping an eye on the 10-year note auction this afternoon at 1 o'clock Eastern time. Headlines today. Let's go to the Morning Briefing America. Musk kind of backtracking a little bit, regrets some of his posts. Regarding Donald Trump, saying he went too far. We have had a trade deal ish between US and China. Agreeing on the outlines of a plan is kind of very thin on content. Markets a little bit underwhelmed with that, and markets that were up yesterday, but a little bit down. To up to recent highs yesterday, not up to the all-time highs yet, but nudging that way. A little bit of a dip overnight. So not a negative clearly, because they do have the outlines of a plan, but I mean nothing more than lack of the detail. Really hasn't helped markets. US stock futures dipping, and all focus on US inflation. Again, the Los Angeles enacted a curfew for parts of downtown, but I mean at the moment, this is not. I mean, obviously, it's a concern, but it's not impacting into financial markets in here at the moment. So here we have Musk say we get social media posts lashing out at Trump. US-China officials agree on a plan that awaits seeing Trump sign off, but few details and a lightweight plan at the moment, or lightweight on details. China's latest trade deals with US leads investors none the wiser. So again, lack of information. The China framework underwhelms. US stock futures dip, a lack of details. CPI and focus, all we've already gone for. Rare earths fight imperiling US-China trade peace. So that's I will share that. It kind of goes into a bit more detail, but this is kind of a part of the crux of the sort of the plan and the framework at the moment. Futures dip on thin US-China trade talk outcome. Already covered all of this. US inflation seen picking up with some tariff pass-throughs. So tariffs starting to potentially have an impact. And as we go back and look at the data, you can see in here. Previous core CPI was at 0.2, month on month up 0.3. Looking for an uptick on the core number from 2.8 to 2.5, and an uptick on the headline on the year on year from 2.3 to 2.5. So potential upticks in these a little bit of a concern, but that is what is priced in. So if we don't get those upticks, they'll be seen as definitely a positive on the inflation front in here. So that's what we're looking at going into the day, really. So no details likely, at the moment, more from the US-China trade talks we've probably had what we're going to have so far. I didn't really get much from Trump yesterday with his speech, and then obviously all focus on the CPI, as I say, and then that 10-year auction at 1 o'clock Eastern time. Scooting around the world indices on the overnights in here, up in Asia, up 0.5%, and then Japanese Nikkei and the Hang Seng up just over 0.8. In Europe, pretty much unchanged in here across the UK FTSE, German DAX, and French CAC. Very little change in here this morning. US stock futures having made small gains yesterday and went closing up near recent highs. Slight dip this morning, but only down 0.2 on the S&P and Nasdaq, so nothing really massive. Treasury yields rise before key inflation data, so that's what we're looking at on this 10-year auction. It's going to be critically in focus, keeping an eye on those markets. I'm not going to go through this. We've been going through this, the last couple of days I've gone through the CME Fed Watch tool. It's not really moving at the moment. Could get some movement after CPI, could get some movement after the auction year, but basically no chance of a cut in really June or July in here at the moment. Likely first cut in September. And then potentially a second cut by the end of the year at the December meeting. Yields, as you can see in here, poised between the recent little swing, peak and swing high. This is the 10-year, 463 to like 430, 32 kind of area as where we've been. We're sat right in the middle of that range. So the market poised to make a statement. But if we go and take a look at our analysis, although under 30, we're clinging to a more bullish tone. That's bullish on prices aiming at lower yields. Across the board in here, the 10s, 5s and 2s, all looking more bearish despite moving slightly up in price. Bearish on price, which means potentially higher yield. So all eyes on CPI and then the 10-year auction, and then tomorrow the 30-year auction to give us some insight on where bond yields are going. Excuse me, and that could potentially hit the equity markets as well. S&P and Nasdaq on our reports in here saying, at recent highs, nudging slightly higher yesterday, remaining bullish, and then let's say that's a slight dip in here overnight in here, as you can see. Here on the ES, we made new recovery highs yesterday, but again, narrow range Monday, slightly wider, but still quite narrow range yesterday. Narrow range so far overnight. The market's really waiting, I think, on this CPI data, and then say also on the 10-year auction. So you can see in here, really has been a slow, just grind higher in here. After the gains that we saw April through May, June has been just very much sideways, grinding just slightly higher in here. Similar story for the Nasdaq. Made new highs yesterday, recent highs yesterday on the trend. Pulls slight dip in here overnight, but underlying theme remains bullish. But we could go either way on this CPI data, and then again 10-year auction. So just to recap, CPI now in 53 minutes, and then the 10-year note auction at 1 o'clock. Anything we get new on trade, I doubt we'll get anything because we've just had that US-China framework announced, which is a little bit lightweight, so light on data. So probably not expecting too much on that front either. So eyes on the data, flipping back to the data, offer tariffs at the moment. CPI now in, 52 minutes, and then the 10-year auction at 1 o'clock Eastern time this afternoon. I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to wish you all a great trading day. Take care, stay safe, and I'll be back with you with another bull versus bear webinar to look at what the data we've had in the auction tomorrow, Thursday. Bye.